Level 1, the darkness. You are 2.5 miles underground. The air pressure sitting on top of the rock ceiling above your head is approximately 8,000 pounds per square inch. You are 28 years old, working as a continuous miner operator in a massive bituminous coal seam in West Virginia. You exist in an environment that is entirely hostile to human biology. The temperature is a constant 55 degrees, but the humidity is absolute. The ground beneath your heavy steel-toed boots is a thick, gelatinous mixture of water, coal dust, and hydraulic fluid. The concept of darkness on the surface is a myth. On the surface, there is always ambient light, a moon, a streetlight, the glow of a distant city. Here, darkness has physical weight. If the battery on your helmet lamp dies, you are plunged into an ancient, terrifying, absolute null. You cannot see your hand pressed directly against your cornea. You work by the piercing, narrow beam of your headlamp, cutting into a wall of solid black carbon. The physical toll of everyday mining is brutal. Your knees grind from crawling through 40-inch high tunnels. Your lungs are constantly filtering highly abrasive, microscopic coal dust, despite the heavy rubber respirator strapped across your face. The noise from the massive cutting drum is deafening, reverberating endlessly off the tight rock walls. You do the job because the money is exceptional, and in this valley, the mine is the only entity writing checks with commas. You have a wife and a newborn son at the surface. You tell yourself the danger is managed. You trust the ventilation engineers. You trust the massive steel roof bolts hammered into the ceiling every 4 feet to keep the mountain from crushing you. It is a profound, necessary illusion. At 2:40 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, the illusion shatters. You hear a sound that does not belong. It is not the mechanical grind of machinery. It is a deep, agonizing crack that you feel in your teeth before you register the sound. A fraction of a second later, the air pressure drops so violently your eardrums pop. Then, the mountain drops. Level 2, the collapse. The violent concussive wave of the roof fall blows you backward over the control panel of the continuous miner. The impact knocks the breath out of you. The air instantly saturates with a blinding cloud of pulverized rock dust. Your headlamp beam is reflected back at you in a solid white wall of particulate. You cannot see. You cannot breathe. The silence that follows the initial collapse is absolute and terrifying. The massive ventilation fans that normally pull millions of cubic feet of air through the tunnels are dead. Clear, someone screams. Clear the face. You scramble backward on your hands and knees. You instinctively reach for your self-rescuer, a heavy metal canister clipped to your belt. It is not an oxygen tank. It is an intricate chemical rebreather that converts the carbon monoxide of a mine atmosphere into breathable air. It gets incredibly hot, over 130 degrees when activated, burning your throat with every breath. You have precisely 1 hour of breathable air to navigate a labyrinth of collapsed tunnels in total darkness. You find 3 other men from your crew huddled against a rib of intact coal. The main escapeway is completely blocked by 1,000 tons of shattered sandstone. The secondary escapeway is filled with rising water. You begin the crawl to the tertiary route. You move like insects in the dark. The fear is palpable, tasting like copper in your mouth. You check your gas monitor. The methane levels are rising rapidly in the unventilated air. A single spark from a pickaxe striking rock could turn the entire drift into a fuel-air bomb. You navigate a maze of twisted steel rails and fallen electrical cables for 45 excruciating minutes. The heat from your rebreather is blistering your lips. At minute 49, you see the faint, distant flicker of a staging area light. You survive. When the cage finally lifts you to the surface, you step out into the blinding afternoon sun. Your wife pushes through the police perimeter, sobbing uncontrollably. You hold her, your face smeared entirely in black dust. You tell her you're never going back down. It is a lie you both want to believe. Level 3, the affliction. You stay away from the mine for 6 months. You take a job driving a delivery truck. The pay is halved and the work is profoundly unfulfilling. You realize you missed the brotherhood, the extreme trust, the shared understanding of the dark. The surface world feels trivial, loud, and disconnected. When a localized fire traps 2 mechanics in an adjacent drift, you stand at the perimeter fence watching the mine rescue team deploy. They are the elite. They wear specialized, heavy breathing apparatuses and carry highly calibrated gas monitors into atmospheres that would kill an unprotected man in 3 breaths. You realize you do not want to be the man waiting for rescue. You want to be the man walking into the dark. The selection process for a Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration (MSHA) rescue team is brutal. You must pass a rigorous physical explicitly testing claustrophobia and cardiovascular endurance under massive weight loads. During the culminating simulation, you are blindfolded, outfitted with a 45-pound breathing rig, and forced to crawl through a 3-foot-wide plywood maze filled with non-toxic theatrical smoke and physical obstructions. The maze simulates a collapsed shaft. Halfway through the maze, an instructor grabs your ankle and forcefully yanks you backward. Ceiling collapse behind you, he yells over a loudspeaker playing recorded sounds of rock falls. Secondary collapse ahead. You are trapped. Assess your air. You are laying on your stomach in total darkness. A heavy plywood roof pressing against your mask. Panic spikes instantly. The primal urge to rip the mask off and thrash against the constraints is overwhelming. You force yourself to override your amygdala. You calculate your air consumption, deliberately slowing your heart rate with measured, box breathing techniques. Air at 80%, remaining calm. Holding position for secondary egress orders, you say, your voice remarkably steady despite the terror. You lie still for 40 excruciating minutes. You pass the test. You are selected. Level 4, the apparatus. You are outfitted as a rescue operator. The core of your existence is now the closed-circuit breathing apparatus, commonly referred to as a Draeger or a biomarine. It is not a scuba tank. A scuba tank expels air with every breath. In a toxic mine atmosphere filled with explosive methane, expelling high-pressure oxygen could trigger a detonation. Your apparatus operates on a closed loop. You breathe in pure oxygen from a high-pressure cylinder. When you exhale, the breath travels through a scrubber canister filled with soda lime, which rapidly removes the toxic carbon dioxide. The scrubbed air returns to a flexible breathing bag on your chest, mixing with fresh oxygen for your next breath. This mechanical loop of survival is incredibly heavy. The rig weighs 45 pounds. The soda lime chemical reaction generates massive amounts of heat. Because you do not exhale air into the environment, your body cannot properly dump its own heat. The internal temperature of your mask quickly exceeds 110 degrees. Your first deployment as a junior rescue member, a belt fire at a mine 90 miles away. 9 men are barricaded underground. You are descending in the emergency hoist. The air in your mask is already hot. You are carrying 20 pounds of additional specialized tools, an axe, a sounding rod, a highly tuned gas multimeter. Under no circumstances do you break the seal of your full-face mask. The rescue captain says over your hardwired communication line, the carbon monoxide levels down there are over 4,000 parts per million. 1 breath of ambient air will render you unconscious in 10 seconds. 2 breaths means brain death. You step off the cage at the bottom of the shaft. The smoke is so dense your headlamp penetrates less than 2 feet. You are entirely dependent on the physical lifeline stringing your 5-man team together. You hold the rope with a white-knuckle grip. You are walking into a pressurized oven filled with poisonous gas. Your survival depends entirely on the mechanical integrity of the 45-pound box of chemicals strapped to your back. Level 5, the Reconnaissance Year 4 on the rescue team. The adrenaline of the initial deployments has faded, replaced by cold clinical paranoia. In mine rescue, rushing gets the rescue team killed. Every step into a compromised mine is a calculated gamble against an invisible executioner. A methane explosion has ripped through a longwall section. 29 miners are unaccounted for. This is the hardest mission profile. An explosion shatters the massive ventilation seals, meaning the entire mine is rapidly filling with lethal, highly explosive gas. You are the team advance man. You walk 20 feet ahead of the main rescue line, armed with a multi-gas monitor and a sounding rod. The structural damage is catastrophic. Massive steel I-beams are twisted like aluminum foil by the sheer concussive force of the blast. The rails are fused. The heat still radiantly baking off the coal ribs is suffocating. You take 5 steps, you stop. You sweep the gas monitor. Methane at 0.5%. You report into the heavy radio mic strapped to your throat. O2 is at 10%. CO is pegging the meter. You take 5 more steps. A misstep here is fatal. If you walk into a localized pocket of high-concentration methane and the carbon sole of your boot strikes a spark against a jagged rock, you will trigger a secondary explosion that will obliterate your 5-man team and collapse the entire shaft. Explosive perimeter. The meter begins to blare. The methane concentration has spiked to 5%, the lowest explosive limit LEL. You have walked into a suspended fuel bomb. Hold the line, you shout. We're in the explosive range, pushing to test stratification. You drop to one knee and hold the meter near the floor. The methane level drops. The gas is lighter than air, pooling against the ceiling. You realize you can advance, but only by duck-walking beneath the invisible ceiling of explosive vapor. The physical taxation of duck-walking for a mile wearing a 50-pound rig under an invisible layer of bomb-grade gas is indescribable. Your quadriceps burn with lactic acid, you are emotionally hollowed out. Finally, you reach the blast center. You find the bodies of 7 miners. The blast force was so absolute they never knew what hit them. You tag the location. You do not recover the bodies. Your priority is survivors. You keep moving into the dark, ignoring the profound silence of the dead. Level 6. The Fire. Year 7. You face the most terrifying element of subterranean disasters, an uncontained coal fire. Coal dust is highly combustible. When a seam catches fire, it can burn for decades. The heat generated in a confined, unventilated space is astronomical. A massive friction fire has started on a conveyor belt in a deep vertical shaft mine. 3 miners are trapped 2 miles past the fire zone. To reach them, your team must fight the fire directly in total darkness under breathing apparatus. You establish a staging area 1,000 feet upwind of the blaze. The ambient temperature is rapidly climbing. You are hauling high-pressure fire hoses through knee-deep mud and debris. You are practically suffocating in the heat, contained within your closed-circuit breathing suit. You reach the vanguard of the fire. The spectacle is horrific. The entire tunnel is aglow with a violent, pulsating orange light. The heat is so intense the moisture in the air is instantly turning to superheated steam. Hit the ribs, hit the ceiling, the captain yells. Do not spray the core. If you direct a high-pressure water stream directly into the core of a 1,000-degree coal fire, the water instantly expands into steam at a ratio of 1 to 1,700. In a tight tunnel, this creates an immediate, catastrophic steam explosion that will boil a rescue team alive in their protective suits. You carefully direct the fog pattern of the hose to cool the surrounding rock walls, attempting to isolate the fire. You operate in brutal 15-minute rotations. 15 minutes fighting the fire, 15 minutes resting in the relatively cool staging area. During your third rotation, the rock ceiling directly above the fire groans violently. The extreme heat is compromising the geological integrity of the sandstone. Pull back, pull back. You drop the hose and sprint blindly. 10 seconds later, an 8-foot slab of ceiling rock crashes down onto the exact spot where you were standing, instantly severing the fire hose. The water pressure drops to 0. The fire regains dominance. You lose the tunnel. You and your team retreat. You wait for fresh hoses. You realize, staring at the advancing orange glow, that fighting a coal fire is an impossible war of attrition. You are fighting geology itself. Level 7, the water, Year 9. You are promoted to Team Intelligence Specialist. Your expertise transitions to complex subterranean mapping and hydraulic analysis. A catastrophic breach has occurred at a zinc mine adjacent to a massive, abandoned subsurface aquifer. Millions of gallons of highly pressurized, acidic water are flooding the active workings. 12 miners have retreated to a high-elevation refuge chamber. Locking themselves inside, the water is rising at 4 feet per minute. You are at the Surface Command Center, poring over complex geological surveys and massive mine maps. You are consulting with hydrogeologists and drilling experts. The only way to save the 12 men is to drill a 12-inch rescue borehole directly from the surface, intersecting their isolated refuge chamber accurately within a 2-foot margin. They are at 1,100 feet below surface level. The incident commander states, "The drill rig can sink a shaft in 36 hours. Do they have 36 hours of oxygen?" You check the calculations. The refuge chamber is 50 by 20 feet. 12 men breathing normally will consume the ambient oxygen and generate lethal levels of carbon dioxide in roughly 28 hours. The chemical CO2 scrubbers in their emergency kits extend that timeline by 4 hours. They have exactly 32 hours, you say grimly. If the panic, if the water doesn't breach the seal, you manage the terrifying math of survival. For 32 hours, you do not sleep. You direct the massive drill rig, adjusting the angle to compensate for geological drift. You are effectively performing complex brain surgery with a massive diesel rig on an invisible patient located a quarter-mile straight down in solid rock. At hour 30, the drill bit breaks through the ceiling of the refuge chamber. You send down a specialized communication cable and a fresh oxygen supply line. When the radio crackles to life with the voice of the trapped foreman, the entire command center erupts in exhausted cheers. You do not cheer, you stare at the map. You know how dangerously close you came to intersection failure. Over the next 12 hours, a specialized extraction capsule is lowered down the borehole, pulling the miners out one by one. You watch the final man step out onto the surface. You feel a massive wave of vindicating relief. Level 8, the Captain, Year 13. You are the captain of the MSHA Regional Rescue Unit. The decision-making architecture changes completely. You are no longer executing commands. You are making the calls that dictate who lives and who dies. A massive explosion at an underground coal operation. 40 miners missing. You lead your primary 6-man team down the main shaft. The atmospheric readings are catastrophic. Methane is rapidly pooling at explosive levels. The ventilation seals throughout the mine are utterly destroyed. The secondary escapeways are blocked by roof falls. You advance 2 miles into the mine. Your team locates a barricade constructed out of vent tubing and Apparatus cloth. 9 miners have successfully sealed themselves in a crosscut to escape the toxic carbon monoxide. However, the methane levels in the surrounding tunnels are spiking towards 7% deep in the explosive range. If you breach the barricade to extract the miners, you will introduce catastrophic levels of methane into the trapped atmosphere. If a single spark occurs during the rescue operation, a secondary explosion will instantly vaporize you, your rescue team, and the 9 miners. You have to make the cruelest, most brutal decision of your life. You stop your team. You evaluate the readings. We are retreating. You say over the team comm line. Your lead operator stops dead. Cap, we know they're in there. We can hear them tapping on the roof bolts. The atmosphere is at 6.8% methane and rising. You reply, your voice as cold and absolute as winter steel. If we open that barricade, we trigger an ignition. This is an unrecoverable environment. We are falling back to the surface to attempt a nitrogen injection to inert the atmosphere. Turn around. Cap, if we leave them, they suffocate before the nitrogen works, the operator argues, his voice breaking. Turn around, operator. That is a direct order. I will not sacrifice a 6-man rescue team to save 9 ghosts. You march your team back to the surface, listening to the desperate tapping on the roof bolts fade in the distance. The nitrogen injection fails. The 9 miners die. The families scream at you in the press conference. You absorb their hatred stoically. You do not tell them the metallurgical physics that dictated your choice. You carry the guilt, knowing you kept 6 men alive by abandoning 9. Level 9, the Massacre, Year 18. You face the absolute nightmare scenario. It is a scale of disaster that dwarfs everything you have trained for. A major coal mine with a history of blatant safety violations suffers a catastrophic, propagating coal dust explosion. It is the Upper Big Branch tragedy or something exactly like it. 52 men are underground. The force of the explosion blows the massive concrete portals entirely off the side of the mountain. You arrive on scene to absolute chaos. Plumes of black smoke are bellowing from the shattered drifts. You lead the primary exploration team. The damage is beyond apocalyptic. It looks like a massive military bombing run occurred underground. 2-inch thick steel rails are tied in knots. Heavy mining machinery weighing 50 tons has been thrown hundreds of feet. You advance systematically, testing the air every 10 feet. The destruction is horrifying, but the silence is worse. Over the next 4 days, you work around the clock in agonizing shifts of extreme psychological horror. You do not find survivors, you find body parts. You find the remains of men you drank beer with the week before. You meticulously chart the location of the dead, managing the grim logistics of extracting 29 bodies from an environment that looks like the surface of the moon mixed with charnel house. The physical exertion of moving heavily burned remains in narrow tunnels, while wearing 45 pounds of breathing apparatus completely breaks your body. But the psychological damage is terminal. You stop talking to your team on the radio except for absolute necessities. You shut down emotionally. You build a massive, impenetrable wall between the horror you are touching with your gloved hands and your conscious brain. When the final body is extracted, the operation officially transitions from rescue to recovery, and finally, to investigation. You testify before federal committees. You coldly outline the ventilation failures, the corporate negligence, and the profound preventable tragedy of the event. But you feel nothing. The mine finally took the last piece of your humanity. Level 10, the Ascent. 22 years underground, 14 on the rescue team. You have commanded 20 major disaster responses. You have extracted 38 living miners. You have recovered 60 bodies. The body is a ledger, and the currency of your career is severe restricted pulmonary function and heavy metal toxicity. Despite decades of wearing advanced respirators and heavy-duty closed-circuit apparatus, you could not defeat the environment. The microscopic silica and coal dust found its way into your alveoli during the brief moments you broke your seal, during the chaotic staging periods, and during the years before you joined the rescue team. You have coal workers' pneumoconiosis, black lung. It is an insidious, progressive scarring of the lung tissue that slowly, over years, suffocates you from the inside out. You take harsh steroid inhalers. You struggle to walk up a flight of stairs without stopping to gasp for breath. Your back is permanently damaged from crawling miles through 4-foot tunnels wearing heavy gear. You have 3 compressed discs. You sleep in a mechanized recliner because lying flat puts too much pressure on your failing respiratory system. Your marriage survived, but it is a quiet, fragile truce. Your spouse endured decades of sudden deployments, nights wondering if you were buried beneath 2 miles of rock, and the cold, terrifying man who returned to the surface after the mass casualty events. How are you feeling today? Your spouse asks softly, bringing you a glass of water and your morning medication. You look up. You just spent the night locked in a vivid nightmare of a dark tunnel and the sound of distant tapping on a steel roof bolt. Fine, you wheeze slightly. Your spouse nods, long ago accepting the protective lies, and sits quietly in the armchair across from you. You are forced into medical retirement. The department throws a brief, respectful ceremony. They give you a plaque mounted on a piece of polished anthracite coal. It sits heavily on your shelf. On your final day, you drive to an overlook above your town. You look down into the valley. You see the massive conveyor belts running up the mountainside, the settling ponds, the exhaust fans constantly spinning, pulling air into the labyrinth below. You think about the dark, the absolute heavy pressurized dark. You think about the profound brotherhood forged in the shared terror of the deep earth. You place your hand against your chest. You take a slow, rattling breath. The air on the surface tastes thin. It tastes empty. You turn the car on. You drive away from the overlook. The radio is off. You look in the rearview mirror one last time. You will always be digging.